Eggplant is so important to Italian cuisine, and it goes way beyond eggplant parmesan. In fact, it's so versatile that today we're going to make a multi-course meal using eggplant as the star ingredient. We'll start with the first course of an eggplant and swordfish pasta. For a main course, we're going to do some stuffed eggplant, vegetarian, and then a side dish, a sweet and sour eggplant caponata. Welcome to Actually Italian. I'm Sal and I've been living in Italy for years. I'm really excited to teach you some authentic Italian recipes so you can cook like an Italian yourself. Italian cuisine is all about the cucina povera, which is the peasant food. They're always looking for a meat substitute, and eggplant fills that role perfectly because it's got that flavor, it's got some of the texture, and it just works, not in place of meat, but when you have it in a dish you don't really miss the meat. Let's get started with the first course then, the pasta course. If you've never been to Sicily, you've probably never seen this dish before. It's a classic there though, and it's so good it really deserves wider recognition. We want to get started with prepping the eggplant. To do this, take a nice fresh eggplant and we want to peel it and cut it into decent sized chunks so it has kind of a creaminess when it's cooked. You don't want to bake this because in the pasta it'll fall apart. What we're going to do is fry these cubes in some very hot oil. You want to see that foam, you want to see it really frying up quickly. That's essential to make sure that we don't have a greasy eggplant. We'll just cook these for a few minutes until you see those bubbles kind of start slowing down and they're turning brown. We want to remove them and put them on a rack to cool instead of a paper towel. That way they don't absorb all that grease. Swordfish is a very Sicilian ingredient. You'll see it all over the island. It just pairs so well with eggplant. What we want to do is get a nice fresh steak of swordfish. You could use frozen if you can't get fresh. With the fresh steak though, we want to get rid of the skin because it's inedible. There's also this bone in the middle. We want to remove that bone, but we do want to save it. We're going to make sure we extract all the flavor out of this, so that bone is going to play an important part. Once we have that done, we just need to cut these into small 1-inch cubes roundabout. Now we can start putting the sauce together. We want to start by browning the bone. Once the bone is brown, then we can add the cherry tomatoes. And we want to give it some salt right away so that way they start to break down and release their liquid. Once they're kind of broken down and they're a little bit wilted, then that's when you want to add the swordfish and just give it a quick mix. The swordfish doesn't need to be really cooked through before we add the pine nuts. Then we'll add the garlic. We just need to cook this together for a few seconds. We'll add some white wine to deglaze the pan, and we want to let this cook to release the alcohol. Once this is all mixed and incorporated, then we can add the cooked eggplant so that way it doesn't break down. Then it's time for the herbs. I'm going to add some fresh basil and also some fresh mint because mint and eggplant are a classic combination. We'll mix this all up and then let the swordfish cook through a bit, and at this point we want to remove the bone. For this recipe, I really recommend a short pasta. In this case, I've got a locally made casareccio that we're just going to cook about a minute from al dente. We'll ladle a little bit of the cooking water with the starch into the pan. That's going to create a nice sauce. To finish this up, we're going to add the pasta right into that pan and let it finish cooking for that last minute until it's al dente. Just toss everything together and it's ready to plate. I think you're going to be really surprised by the flavors in this dish. You've got the meatiness of the swordfish that really combines with that meatiness of the eggplant. The pine nuts give it a creaminess. The wine has that nice acid that you want to break up the rich flavors. The thing that ties it all together though is the mint. Without the mint in this, there's just something missing. Let's move on to the main course now, which is stuffed eggplant. Stuffed eggplant you'll find anywhere in Italy that you go. North to south, they just have different recipes for it. For instance, in the central area and the northern areas, you'll often find ground meat as the base of the stuffing. Today we'll do Sicilian style, which is all vegetarian. The first thing we want to do is get the tomato sauce going that the eggplant is going to bake in. It's just a very simple sauce. Just some garlic, good passata, some basil, a little bit of water, and then just let it cook down for about 20-25 minutes. Season at the end and that's it. You can use any type of eggplant that you like. There are a lot of different varieties. The ones I used today were actually right out of my garden and they're Sicilian style, kind of pinkish purple eggplant. What you want to do is remove the stem, but get as close to the top as you can because we don't want to waste any of the eggplant. Then we want to slice these in half. At this point, we want to remove most of the flesh inside. I just take a spoon and just kind of grind it out until it's nice and hollow. We're going to take all that eggplant that we took out of the middle, and we just want to give this a nice chop. Before we start making the stuffing, we want to take those shells and partially cook them. In a little casserole dish, I just put a little olive oil on the bottom, and we'll put these in a 350-degree oven for roughly 15 minutes. I check the eggplant shells after about 15 minutes, just using a knife to poke it. I'm going to take that chopped eggplant, and we're going to saute it in a pan with a little bit of olive oil. I do need to add just a little bit more oil though, because I have to get the onions and the garlic in there to saute along with the eggplant. We'll put a little salt in too, not only to season it, but to help break them down. It's been roughly 10 minutes and everything's cooked through, so we're ready for the stuffing. I've got some breadcrumbs here. I'll just add that eggplant mixture to this, and we want to let it cool slightly. Once it's not piping hot, we just want to give it a nice mix. And at this point, we'll add some grated Parmesan cheese, capers, I chopped up some olives we'll put in there. Herbs are some parsley and basil. You can use whatever herbs you like. And we'll give it another mix and taste it for seasoning. This needed just a little bit more salt. Now we can add the egg that's going to bind everything together. And then we just give it a final mix. I checked the eggplant shells after about 15 minutes just using a knife to poke it. It went through nice and smooth, so these are cooked through. I just want to cool these down just enough so I can handle them. Then just season the eggplant shells with a little salt. And just take some of the stuffing in, pack it in a little bit, not too hard, and just get these full. To assemble this, we just take a casserole dish. We want about maybe an inch on the bottom of sauce, and then we'll put the eggplant right on top. We want to make sure that this stuffing doesn't dry out, so I'm going to drizzle a little bit of olive oil and then put a nice dollop of that sauce on top. These are ready for the oven. Since they're small, I'm going to put this in without a cover. If you were using a really big eggplant, you'd want to cover this for the first half of the baking time. Then about halfway through, you take the cover off and let it finish. Mine are only going to take 20 minutes. Using a large eggplant, you're probably looking at about 40 minutes of cooking time. After 20 minutes, we're ready to plate this up. The flavors are really deep in this. The texture is sort of like a meatball almost, and the flavor isn't that much different either, except you also have the brightness of the herbs, the nice brininess of the capers and olives, and then that rich tomato sauce just really brings everything together. We're going back to Sicily for the side dish. Caponata is an all-time Sicilian classic, and in my opinion is the best way to serve eggplant. The first thing we want to do is fry the eggplant in the same way that we did the swordfish and eggplant dish. So eggplant is the star of this dish, but there are other vegetables involved. We don't want to cook the eggplant together with all the other vegetables, so it doesn't break down and just become like a mush. I'll start with peeling the celery so it's not so fibrous. We'll give it a rough chop. Some roughly chopped carrot will go in, roughly chopped onion. We've got some garlic, and then some cherry tomatoes. We'll start with the celery and carrots in a pan over a medium-low heat with some olive oil, since these are going to take the longest to cook. I'll toss them around, give them a little bit of salt, and cover them. After a couple of minutes of starting to soften up, I'll add the onion. We'll do the same thing, just a little bit of salt, mix it around, and let it soften. Once these vegetables are mostly cooked through, we'll add the cherry tomatoes. Some people will add passata, and this is all just a matter of opinion. I like the chunkiness and the sweetness and the acidity of a fresh tomato. Once the tomatoes are wilted and broken down, we can add the cooked eggplant. At this point, we'll season it, and we'll give it a quick mix before we add the garlic. Now it's just a matter of adding the olives, the capers, and the pine nuts, and the herbs. Once again, it's basil and mint. Give everything a nice mix. And now it's ready for the sweet and sour component. I'm going to give some generous tablespoons of honey to this. You can use sugar too. And once we see it starting to foam a little bit and almost starting to caramelize, we want to add the vinegar. In this case, I'm using a white wine vinegar. You could use red wine vinegar too. I wouldn't use balsamic, it just doesn't work in this dish. And we'll give everything a nice toss and shut the heat off. At this point, I'll give it a taste for seasoning, add a little bit more salt if it's needed, and that's it, it's ready. This is one of those dishes that gets better with time. Let it sit for a few hours, overnight is even better. In that time, the vinegar is gonna really mellow out, and the sweetness of the vegetables will really start coming through. I'm gonna give it a taste right now because it's ready. The eggplant is super creamy and just really rich. The brininess of the olives and the capers just really give that nice salty bite. The crunch of the pine nuts gives a little texture. There you have it, 3 awesome eggplant recipes. If this video helped inspire you to try some different eggplant recipes, then I'd really appreciate it if you give the video a like, and we'll see you next time.